All right, I think the number of new people joining has slowed down, and if anyone wants to join, they can just hop in whenever. So I'm going to get started, and thanks for joining me to the Future MEMD Dental School Symposium. My name is Karam, and I am currently a third-year dental student at the University of Toronto. I'm not going to take too much of your time with this. I'll just do a quick 10-minute talk and then leave it up for mostly a Q&A because I think that'll be the most valuable part of this. Just a little bit about me. I didn't always want to be a dentist, so the path that you get here is very different. I know some of my classmates have wanted to be one since they were a little kid. Both their parents were dentists. I did not have any family members as dentists, so it was something that I came across later on in my life. I've always lived in Ontario, and I do try to have fun outside of school. So just a little bit about my academic experience. And again, this is different for everyone in my class. So I did a general science degree at the University of Guelph in biomedical sciences. I then did grad school in human health and nutritional sciences, also at the University of Guelph. And then after that, I came to a crossroads of what I wanted to do in my life, either continue on as a PhD student, or I've always wanted to work in a healthcare field. So I came across dentistry, got into the University of Toronto, and have been here since. Okay, so getting to a little bit more towards the dental school experience. I wrote my DAT in February. I'm not sure if some of you may have already written the DAT or not, but I just found this a good time because reading week preceded this test for me. So it was really a nice, perfect week-long thing where I didn't have to worry about school or anything, and I was just able to focus on the DAT. I studied while I was in grad school, so I dedicated a couple nights a week for about 8 weeks. I studied using a Kaplan prep book. I actually have the book on hand if anyone wants to see it later. I did the practice exam that you get when you sign up, and then also use some websites like the DAT Bootcamp or DAT Crusher. And I'd also written the MCAT prior to writing the DAT. So in that sense, it lightened my studying for the biology and chemistry sections. But the DAT was a far better experience. It felt like I was just writing another undergrad exam. You walk in, leave your bag in the same room, and everyone's writing at just tables with you. Whereas the MCAT was a lot more stressful, in my opinion. Just some extracurriculars, and I just included things that I did before dental school, not what I'm doing currently. And as you can see from my list, I did not have any dental school, I didn't help volunteer at a dentist or nothing like that. So that's not a must to have on an application. I just did a variety of things and things that I enjoyed. I helped out at our local hospital in various departments over the years. I played a lot of intramural sports. I just was involved with various organizations on campus. I also always had a job throughout undergrad. I worked as a research assistant and at the local bookstore. And then looking into the future, dental school is a lot of fun. There's so many ways to be involved, and you can definitely keep on going with that if you'd like. So something that you may be more interested in is just my application experience. So I applied to these 4 schools: Toronto, Western, UBC, and McGill. UofT at the time when I applied actually had the simplest application of anything. All I did was just write my name, pay the deposit, and send in my DAT scores, and that was it. However, over this past year, they have made a few adjustments to the application. And now you need to write the Casper test and have 2 writing components, one being an essay on your greatest accomplishment in life, and then as well as a personal statement on why you want to be a dentist. So for this, I don't have the best answer because I did not actually have, I haven't gone through that stage. So a particular question on those 2 writing things, if you know anyone who's starting dental school this fall at U of T, they'd probably be the best people to ask, or anyone who has applied, because they've actually gone through that little part of it. Western just had an autobiographical sketch. I don't believe they need the Casper still. UBC, I had to write the Casper for and then just fill out an application form. And then McGill, also a Casper. And then they had an autobiographical sketch, but it was more laid, like it was just like small fill-in areas. And as you can see by this, the Casper is very important. So that's something that you should not neglect in your application process. So after the application process, going into the interview, I got interview invitations from Toronto and Western. I will explain why I didn't get one from UBC or McGill, or at least to the best of my abilities. And I only attended Toronto's interview because I was given my offer of admission prior to Western even giving their interview offers. And at that stage of my life, I just wanted to live in Toronto and kind of forced your hand into picking them right away because the deposit was due very soon. But don't regret my choice so far. As for the actual interview, it was really relaxed and friendly. Like I got that vibe right away. You were greeted by a whole bunch of current students once you got in. There was faculty, coffee, like just snacks. Like you weren't just thrown right into your interview. You were brought in, you hung out a little bit in the cafeteria, talked to everyone, got relaxed, and then they took you up for 3 MMI stations, which also were not too stressful. Like I'm not going to share what those stations were. However, it was just like whenever you prepped for an MMI question, like it was very generic questions. You had 2 minutes to read the scenario on the door, and then you had 8 minutes in the room. Again, you didn't have to take the entire time. Sometimes they had follow-up questions. Sometimes they just told you to go hang out outside until the time was up if you finished early. And then another thing I really enjoyed about my interview experience was they gave a lot of tours of the faculty. So there was a student-run tour of everywhere in our building. And then there was a Q&A with the dean and some upper year students. So again, just more things to make you feel like this is the place that I want to go to. Just some general tips that I have. They're fairly cliche and generic, but I think they're important to know. So my first one is apply early, know the deadlines, and know all the requirements for each school. And like I said, I didn't get an interview to UBC because I just assumed I met their requirements for having my English credits in undergrad, and I didn't. I took a class which they didn't count. So that was something where I wasted time applying and money, whereas if I had just read or looked into this more clearly, I wouldn't have, I guess, applied there to begin with. Also, when you're ordering transcripts and they're getting sent all over the country, like sometimes they have to be a hard copy. So this takes time, and same with reference letters. A lot of the times they have to be, like Toronto didn't need any, but at other schools, like they're sealed in an envelope and you send them out. So all of these things you just need to be aware of. And I think if you know when everything's due and whenever the deadlines approach, that's the best thing I can tell you. A second tip is make yourself stand out on your autobiographical sketch. Don't just write things that you would think people would like, because then if you're ever asked about it, or even when you're explaining it, you may not do the best job. Just be original, be yourself. Write down what you've done. And like I said before, like I did not have anything on my extracurriculars or resume or growing up to be like a dentist, but I just did things that I liked. And when I applied places, I was honest. Like I didn't make up anything about dentistry or anything like that. My third tip would be, this is more towards the interview, practice, practice, practice. And it's not like so much as like just writing out questions or like reading them out to the mirror. Like that's okay, but I thought the best thing I could do is like I practiced with a few of my friends. Even my sister and my mom helped me out, just because everyone gives you different feedback on how to do things, and it's so much different like talking in front of another person rather than just rehearsing to yourself. So I think this is the most important thing. Like if you do have an interview, like practice all these scenarios out with one of your friends or family. Don't sound scripted, just answer a question as you would yourself, not what Google's top answer is for that question or anything like that. You can also, I didn't personally do this, but like record yourself just to see your posture, your hand movements, because a lot of the times you don't realize you're doing things. And if you record yourself, you'll know right away. I also had a few classmates who, I wore a tie, but some of them didn't because they realized like it's something you would just fidget towards. So that's something like if you notice yourself doing, it's something you may want to consider. And my last tip that I thought really worked for me, especially in my interviews, is just use personal examples as much as you can. Don't just say that you're a hard worker, have good skills. Like you need to always provide an example for that. And then this is just a better way for them to get to know you. So that was my talk. I hope I didn't bore anyone, but I think this is the most informative part. So I will open it up and you guys can send me questions in the chat or in the Q&A section, and I'll try to answer them as best as I can. Thank you. Okay, so I got a question that said, what strategies did you use to make yourself a competitive applicant and stand out from others? So I think one thing that really stood out, or one thing that really helped me out was like, well, being in grad school, I had a very strong research part of my application. So originally at Toronto, like that wasn't a big deal, but when I applied to, let's say, Western or any other programs that I applied to that are not even in dentistry, like I thought that was a big thing that I could do. Also, like I had longevity in my commitment. So like when I volunteered, I didn't just volunteer for 6 months and it wasn't just prior. Like it's something I'd started in high school or just in undergrad and did it throughout. Like I think that was another thing. And then also being diverse in various sections. So like I said, like I had a strong research area. There was other parts that I probably was weaker in, like in various categories on an application, but I just tried to, if I noticed something that I wasn't good at or didn't have much in, like I tried to dedicate a bit more time there. So I think that's one way. And then also when you're filling out all of the applications, like your title of what you say is very important because a lot of the times, like I'm sure like thousands of applicants apply, and if your title is very boring or generic, like try to make that stand out. And then even in your descriptor, like because you don't get many characters usually to explain, so you want to get the most out of that. I hope that was all right, but if not, I'll touch on that one a bit later. Okay. The second question, if dentistry school hadn't worked out for you, what are some other related careers one could pursue instead? So I didn't mention this in my talk earlier, but like during my second year of grad school, I wasn't sure. Like I said, like dentistry wasn't something I thought of originally in my life, like until I was about 24. So when I applied to dental school, I also applied to other healthcare programs because that's what I wanted to do. So I applied to nursing, paramedic school, a cardiovascular respiratory program. So these are all careers that having my undergrad degree in science would like gear me towards. All very great jobs, all work within the healthcare field. I also could have considered doing my PhD. I realized while I was in grad school that I didn't want to pursue a career in academia, but I don't have anything negative to say about being in grad school. I learned a lot. I learned a lot of skills that I didn't have in undergrad. So there's many options other than dental school. But also, if you don't get in right away, or there's no harm in reapplying and taking that year off just to better yourself, doing things that you enjoy, making you a better candidate, maybe just working on the interview skills if that was something that needed work. So lots of things. The next question is, when did you do the Casper? So I did the Casper, it was near the time I wrote the MCAT, because I think when I applied, which would have been, I think, October of the year that I applied. I think there's 2 dates. I'm sorry if that's not a correct date, but I did it like near the time of all the application process. So if I applied in December for dental school, I think I wrote the Casper just like a month or so before then. The next question is, what is Toronto specifically looking for in an applicant? So like I said, like when I applied, their application process didn't really get anything out of me. Like they didn't know who I was other than my name, what program I had or what school I'd taken undergrad, and then my DAT score. However, I think at some point, I know everyone's like grades are very good, but I think it reaches a point where you don't know how to differentiate anyone. So I think that's why they've expanded their criteria. And Toronto, like my class is very diverse. Like people are from all different academic backgrounds, like some in chemistry, some in like bio, some engineers. We have like an English major, like so they've. It's not necessarily like an academic background that they're looking for. They just value, I'd say, research a lot now because it is University of Toronto and they get a lot of funding in that area. But I think just generically with like every program, like they want hardworking, dedicated, committed individuals. And I think if you're able to show that in your interview and now I guess in your personal statement about why you want to be a dentist, and then like having a greatest achievement as well. Sorry, next question. I know that you said you didn't really do any dentistry related work, but do you think it would be very beneficial to shadow a dentist? Would it help in your application? So I can talk about this a little bit. When I applied to Western, like they had a question saying, did I do anything dentistry related? And I said, no. However, I had shadowed in a doctor's office before. So I tied that in a little bit to answer that question. But to me personally, like even being an assistant to some of the upper year students in the past, like in dental school, I don't know how much you really get out of it until you have done it yourself. Like it would be nice to go shadow a dentist and see, but I think until you've actually done the act of dentistry, it's very different than watching someone else do it. Like it may look cool, or you may not like it when you're watching someone, but like actually doing it yourself. For the application process to U of T, I don't think having prior dental experiences, because they don't ask you. Maybe in an interview question, like if you're able to tie it in somehow to your answer, like that would look great. But there wasn't a point where they had known whether or not you had. I think it's just a personal thing. Like if you're unsure about the career or how you want to pursue it, I think it would be a good way to just see. Would you mind sharing your CGPA? Sure. So U of T drops your lowest year. So mine, when I applied, was 3.93, which was just around the average, I think, for my class. Like I know some people had, I'm sure, 4.0s and some lower. So I don't think that should be a deterrent as long as you have a competitive GPA. I think it's good, especially if you get an interview. That's everything onwards is usually based off of that. What kind of language did you use during the interview? Like, do you have to use big words, or are you just yourself? I was just myself. Big words would get me confused, and I'm sure like I was really nervous on my interview too. Like even so, I just tried to keep things simple. I feel like big words would help me stumble. And at Toronto, like they only had 3 stations, so they just really just wanted to get to know you. And all of the interviewers, like I guess I later realized, like they're either profs or just dentists in the community or faculty members at the school. So they really just want to get to know how you are as a person. I don't think using big words or anything like that would impress them, but having just like a good sound answer, being natural would be the best way to approach that. The next question, for this year's admission cycle, will the winter 2020 grades still count? As I know some schools are not accepting these grades. That I'm not sure on. I think the best way to find that would be just to contact the admissions office directly, just like a quick email or call, or maybe I'm sure they'll update their website regarding that. I know this past semester has been very different. Like even with our schooling, we got to just pass credit or like just credit a course. So I'm not sure how these are being taken into consideration. So sorry about that. I just email or contact the school directly for that. How did you get involved in Seek Out opportunities? So if it's just pre-undergrad, I got involved. Well, the hospital, for example, I went and did that on my own. Like that wasn't anything that I saw at school. I just dropped off a resume at the volunteer department, got an interview there, and then went on that way. As for just things in school, a lot of things like I learned about from my friends as well, like just different clubs that they were involved with, their positions. So that was a way. I know there's always like bulletin boards and stuff around. I realize like with our current situation, it's a little bit difficult to seek out some opportunities like that, but I'm sure there's still ways to volunteer. Just online resources, like whatever you're interested in, I think just looking into that area, like websites through the school or just through the search engines would be a good way. If I didn't answer that properly, I can get back to that one. The next one, would you recommend taking a gap year or doing a master's if you don't get in after undergrad? So in this situation, like I did my master's, but I was just in a situation where I wasn't sure what I wanted to really do. And I was already going to work in a lab for my last summer of undergrad. So I just thought about it and I realized that to like better myself, I think doing a little bit more schooling, such as my master's, would help me improve in areas of research and then just like presentation skills, like critical thinking, like all of these things that I felt like I didn't really get from doing my undergrad. So I would say doing a master's in my personal situation really helped me out. But I know I have a lot of classmates that took a year off and they traveled or just worked. So it's, I think, whatever you want from it. But I moved back home after undergrad and I realized that my parents would be nagging on me a lot if I just sat around for that year. So that also made it a little bit easier for me to just go back to school and do my master's. But if your parents are not gonna nag on you, maybe taking that gap year is a good idea too. But if you also realize that maybe there's a reason why you didn't get in, and if you're not going to better yourself in that year just by taking it off and doing nothing, then I think that would also help, maybe like doing a master's and improving in those areas. And there's no rush. Like you could take a couple years off and apply to dental school. Like everyone's all different ages in my class, and it doesn't affect you in any way when you're in school. Next question, do you have to submit an ABS for your application cycle? If so, what did you list on it? So for the University of Toronto, we didn't have to, but I can talk about my Western application. They, or McGill, they both asked for one. So I added a few things, like there's always like the work experience. So I just talked about any job that I had in undergrad. I didn't add anything from high school on any application, by the way. And then volunteer experience. So I just listed a few things there. If it's an endless list, then list everything. But if the box or space is not that large, like just go with your top 3 or 4 things. Diversity is also good. I talked about any awards that I'd won, any like articles that were published. And I think there's usually just like a section for like extracurricular things, like recreational as well. Those all count. Like you spend your time running or training for marathons or biking, playing squash, like all those things are a part of something that you do on a day-to-day basis. You could add those as well. What was your GPA and DAT score, if you don't mind? So I said my GPA a little earlier. It was like 3.93. So it was around an average GPA for my class, maybe a little bit higher. And my DAT score for sure was lower than average. I had I think 21 academic, like the AA, and then my PAT score was a 19. Again, like that shouldn't be a discouraging thing if it's a little bit lower. Like other things balance it out. And what is something you can do during an interview to be different and memorable? Are jokes okay, for example? So I don't want to give an answer and make it seem, because I only went to my Toronto interview, and I feel like if I made a joke there, depending on like how the interview was going, like it probably would have been acceptable. However, I think I would try to stay professional in the interview setting and not resort to jokes, but being different and memorable. I think this is where tying in like personal experiences really help, because like everyone's going to say like they're kind, friendly, like they do all, but like you need to back that up and give an example. I tied in a lot of things, like just like for my research project in grad school, like I remember I mentioned that a few times. Just like for like leadership quality, that was like an example. Or I was a teaching assistant, or like I volunteered here. Like just these are the things that will make you memorable and stand out. And I think that would set you apart. I know a lot of us have done like, because like we grow up and we know like these are the things that you're going to do, or these look good. So I know a lot of us do extracurriculars that are very similar. But when you tie in a personal experience from that or how it impacted you, I think that's what can set you apart, even if you're doing the same thing as someone else. Next question. When should we apply to U of T if we only want our last 3 years to be counted? I'm very confused about this. So if you applied after third year to, for example, U of T, they will only take your last 2 years of marks. So let's just say your second and third year marks were better than first year, so they will get rid of first year. In my case, since I did 4-year undergrad and I had to take a few classes in grad school, which do count. So in my case, they took 4 years and dropped my lowest one. And then if you just did a 4-year undergrad degree, they would get rid of your worst year there. So if 1, 3, and 4 were your better ones and your second year marks were lower, that would be the year that they didn't count. I hope that makes sense. Did you write the manual dexterity test? I didn't, because in Canada anyways, the only school that I think that I was interested in that took it was University of Alberta, but when you sign up for the DAT, you can send your score to 5 schools already, and I was content with that. I didn't think doing the like the manual dexterity test would have benefited me. But if there's a particular school, or if you want to open up your options to several schools, then for sure I would recommend writing the manual dexterity test. I know a lot of my classmates didn't write it, so I don't think it's very common. But for example, like if U of A is a school that you really are interested in going for, then definitely go for it. And the way it works on the day is you just write that test in the morning, and then you would go do the rest of the DAT. That's the only difference. Whereas if you don't write it, you would just go write the DAT. Next question. Any tips for getting a high GPA in undergrad, study skills, time management, etc.? So for my personal experience, like when I started, like my lowest marks were my first semester of university, like one like new situation, making friends. Like it was a lot different than high school. And I know like that for sure, like could be a tough semester for many people. But how I started to achieve a better GPA as I went through, I don't think I studied more, but I started to study better. And I realized like on a day that I needed to take off and do nothing, like I did that rather than putting in half effort, wasting 3-4 hours of a night studying and not actually learning. I didn't get anything from that. So I realized that's one way that I can manage my time, still enjoy university, and do well in school. So I just but when I did study, I did dedicate like all my effort and focus there. And then when I didn't worry about that. During undergrad as well, so you have a lot of like chunks in the day, I'd imagine. Like if you don't have labs, like classes are very spaced out still. So I took advantage of that. Like rather than going back home and doing nothing, I would just stay at the library, or like I used my time efficiently in that sense. So after a class, if I wanted to study something, like I would do that. Also, I was lucky in that a lot of my friends from undergrad, like we were all in the same program. So whenever it was time to study, like we would study together, or you just had like there weren't as many distractions. So I know like not everyone, like you could have friends from all different programs, but if you have some ones from your own program that you like to study with, like I think that would be helpful. Next, what are some things you wish you knew prior to entering dental school? One, like I thought I didn't really know what type of classes, for example, I was going to be taking. Like I just assumed, just learning like biology of the mouth and uh, like working on dental skills. And that's something like we learn a lot, and a lot of the like we learn a wide variety of classes as well. So I just think knowing that would have been nice. Um, I feel like the school is very good at telling you like how to get involved and when things are. So I don't think that was different. There's just some things that like currently I'm in dental school that I feel like we don't, and that's just like what happens once you're done. Like we're not really prepped too much on, I would say like the business aspect of dental school, or like do you work as an associate dentist, or do you just open up your own practice, like things like that. So those are the things that I'm still unsure of, and I don't think the school itself has taught me. But prior to entering, I think just the level of courses, and I didn't realize how much class time we had either. Like it's like a full-time job. We have class usually like 8 to 5 every day with labs. Like that was a big change as well from undergrad, and I didn't know that. So also wish I knew that. It just changed like a few things in how you manage your time, but everyone gets used to it as well. Would you be able to share your DAT score? Sure. If you didn't hear it from before, I had a 21 academic average and a 19 PAT. So both were like 1 percentile score lower than the average. So again, like that should be a deterrent for you in any way. Like if it's a little bit lower here, you balance that out with other things. When did I start my application process in dental school? Like what is considered early in the cycle? So each school has different application times. And then, as I said, like I also applied to like nursing school and paramedic school. So like I was doing applications for a while, and I know like like I was lucky where I didn't have my undergrad like midterms and stuff, but it's a busy time of year for everyone. I understand that. So I think just knowing the date of when to apply, just have that written down, and then just dedicate some time towards that. And how I discovered the things like in the summertime, I guess before, I just looked into what schools I was interested in, and then had a plan for that, because some applications are due earlier. So like I worked on that one before, like let's say one was due at the end of August. I dedicate time there. And then I think UofT's application, well, it only took me like 10 minutes because they just wanted a paycheck and my name. So that one I didn't have to spend too much time on. But Westerns was a big application, and I know like it was due a little bit later, so I could dedicate some time later on for that. So just tried to space it out. How many students were admitted right after undergrad? Do you think there's a better chance if I applied 4th year of undergrad? I'd say the majority of my class did complete their 4-year. So we have a class of, when we enter, 96. I think we had maybe 15 to 20 people who did grad school. Maybe there's like 10 people that got in after 3rd year, a few that took that year off. So I'd say about half the class, I'd say at least were admitted right after their 4-year undergrad. I don't think there's, unless things happen behind the scenes, like I don't want to say anything false or wrong about this, but I don't think there's any difference if you applied after 3rd year or 4th year. I think as long as you have a sound application and your like maybe if you were unsatisfied with 1 year of your marks and you wanted to add another year to like solidify your GPA, then I think maybe the 4th year would help. But if you're very happy with your like your GPA after 3 years of undergrad, I don't think that's any hindrance of you applying. How is it different from undergrad? Workload, content. So this I thought was a pretty big change because in undergrad we only have 5 or 6 classes, a lot of time in between, like you have classes like 9, 11, 5 o'clock, for example, and then a lot of time in between. But now in dental school, that whole block is taken up. And at first, like first year had a lot of classes and less lab work, whereas my year this year we had a lot more lab work, less class, but we were still there at the same time. The number of courses is a lot more. I think I had 14 this past semester, but some are much smaller in content. So even if like it seems daunting, like you just learn to balance it out as you go. One thing that did change though is, like I said, where I used to study during the day, like now most of my studying was relegated to the evenings or weekends. And there's a lot of additional things that you have to do in dental school that you don't plan for. Like you go in to do additional drilling practice and things like that. And this all happens after school. So you would need to balance that out as well. But there's also periods of time in school where like there aren't any tests, and it's like take those times to like relax and unwind. And then once the tests pick up again, then you learn to manage that way. Content wise, a lot of like if you're learning just like microbiology or like histology and things like that, very similar to anatomy, like they're very similar to undergrad courses. And yes, you redo all of those things here, but as for like the dental content or biomaterials, like that was all new. But again, you just transfer the same skills that you use for any other class, and they're all good. How do you manage your time wisely to stay on top of dental school life while still having life outside of school? So I hope I kind of answered that in the previous one, but I know like when a test is coming, like the 3, 4, 5, like depending on the test, like those days beforehand, I know I'm going to dedicate towards studying. So like after school, I would just go grab some food and then head back to the library at school and study, or use the weekends. But then I also don't use the time where I know like there's no test for a few weeks. Like I don't personally spend that time trying to catch up, because I know like myself that I'm not going to retain a lot of this, and I may as well take that time to enjoy life outside of school. And then when I need to work hard, I'll try to. If I didn't answer that one, I can get back to it for sure. What's the average age of most students when they start dental school? I think the average age, like most of the students in my class were born in 96. So I think they were 22, maybe 23 was the average. I think the oldest person was in their like mid 30s. Youngest was 20. So the age group's pretty wide, but most people would be like finished their 4th year of undergrad and then cut it. So that would be the average age. And I guess 22 would be it. What personal qualities do you think makes for a good dentist? So like, I think like a lot of people think like hand skills and like how good of a dentist you do are very, like they're important, which they for sure are. But as like a patient who's coming in for anything, like they don't know how good your cavity preps are or your filling. So like you need to be competent in that part. But I think what like would set you apart is just being, I don't know, just being like a genuine, nice human being, like make them feel welcome. don't be don't be undermined. Like just like be a nice individual. Take time to listen to them. Show compassion, empathy. Like just these are the things that would make you, when you're having an interaction with the patient or another person, that would, I think, like make for a better experience, because no one's going to be looking at your x-rays of cavity preps or like looking in your mouth and being like, oh, like they did a great filling on this tooth. Like it's just like, I think your experience with them that would set you apart as a good dentist. Did you use any dental school admission consulting services for any planning or interviews? So I personally didn't use any services, but I did have a few friends that had applied to other healthcare programs. So I did consult, like I talked to them just like to see how their interview process went. They helped me out with the interview. I guess I took an MCAT prep class. Like I know that's not due to dental school, but I think I learned a few things from there that helped me on the DAT. Personal statement and editing of that, I just sent it to a few of my friends to look over, because sometimes like you've read it over so many times you don't realize that you're missing a period here or some words misspelled, so it's always good for that. The Casper prep, that's something that I probably, like if I had to go back, I would probably do. I'm a very slow typer, so I think my answers were very insufficient, and I think maybe learning how to tackle that would have helped me get an interview, let's say at McGill, because I didn't get one there, and probably was due to my Casper score. So I think that would be a great thing to invest in, especially since so many schools are looking into that now. What made me pursue a career in dentistry? So I don't, if you didn't catch this in my presentation, like I don't have any family members in dentistry, and I know just growing up, like it wasn't a career that I had thought of. However, like as I was in grad school, and I know I didn't want to continue in research, I started looking around to see other programs. I saw dentistry, read up on it. I know there's like great progression in the field, always learning, continuing, get to work with people. So just that desire of wanting to do something like that led me to pursue dentistry. It wasn't that I was like passionate about it at the age of 8 or whatever. And I know a lot of people are that way. And then a few people in my class are the same way, that I know, like, is this something I stumbled upon later on? And I kind of went in, like, just took a chance, and like I'm enjoying it, but it's different for everyone. I don't have a great solid answer of why I want to be like it wasn't something that I'd considered throughout my life to do. What's a reasonable number of schools you should apply to? So I applied to 4. I'd say if you're not overwhelmed with by applications, like if you're applying to other programs or anything like that, I would say apply to the 5 that you get covered with your DAT if you want to. I know all applications are different, and depending on like your midterm schedule or just like the due dates for all of them, like it can get overwhelming. So definitely target the ones that you want to go to for sure. So if you live in Ontario, like Toronto and Western would be ones for sure to do. And then if you want to apply to any other schools, considering like their time available, like go for it. They're also expensive. Like I know applications do add up, so you also have to take into consideration. And if you're just applying to one where you don't think you would want to go to, or even if you got an interview, like making your way out there may be tough. So I think all of these things should be considered. But if you don't have a limit, like if financially it's no problem, and since you're sending your DAT score to those 5 schools anyways, like I would for sure apply to those 5 and then go from there. It also depends, like if you're applying from third year, I know not all schools take you right away. So then like you're only left with applying to Toronto or whatever ones do that. How do you think the field of dentistry would change with COVID? It's a great question. My school currently is like, we did our last semester online, and I have a lot of clinic and lab time to make up on. I know there's a lot of strict measures that dentists have to take. Like we need floor to ceiling walls. We need a lot of time to clean the room afterwards. Just equipment as well, like working with a different mask than we're used to, plus a face shield. Like all of these things would be changing. I know jobs may be a little bit like if you're just starting off as an associate and there's not as many patients, like it might be a little bit of a challenge right away to get a job. But I think this is ever changing. Like even my school, we still don't really have a date when we like the students can go back and do actual clinic work yet. So I think that's just gonna be something that we just have to follow over time. But I think it's definitely impacted the field of dentistry because just of all the measures that we have to take to ensure safety of the patients. How did I get a research position in undergrad? So this may not be at every school, but at the University of Guelph, for example, where I went, there was something called like a work study program for students. So I could work up to 10 hours a week and just like work in a lab. So this wasn't really a research position, but this is how I started. I got this, I worked in this lab part-time during the school year. And then in the summer, they opened up a research assistant position for that lab. And then I applied to get that. I know they're limited and everyone wants them, or like the ones that are interesting. So I worked in a field that I didn't really know much about, but it was a great, like at the time it was just a job. And then I really started to enjoy my research experience there as well. But to make yourself stand out, like you could volunteer in a lab beforehand. That's a great way for like a prof to get to know you. And then eventually, like in third year or fourth year summer, like if you still wanted the position, like they know you already and your work ethic and everything like that. So that's a good way to get it. I think just having prior experience working in a lab like helped with like subsequent positions. Like I know it shouldn't always be like that, but I think I got lucky in that sense. But I think the best way to be is try to somehow get into a lab situation. And it doesn't have to be paid or anything, like, or do a research project with a professor. And then again, like they get to see how your work skills are and whether or not you're a good fit for the lab. And then that's another good way to then get a paid position in the summer as a research assistant. But again, doing it through a course or working in the summer, like you get the same experience, like in my case, like how I did. How did I prepare for the DAT? When did you take the test after second year, and how long did you prepare for the DAT? So I spent 8 weeks and I just took a few evenings. I just bought a book. It's like a Kaplan dental prep book. Went through that a little bit by a little bit. And then I spent a little bit of time like each week just doing like PAT questions because I don't think books really prepare you for that. Like the best way to do that is just doing practice questions because like knowing how like a shape fits through the like reading about all these strategies and stuff is fine, but until you actually like just practice, and there's a lot of websites that like had free tests and stuff for free questions. It was just a good way to get more because I know they're hard to come by. How many months? So I guess 2 months, but I also if you missed this, like I wrote the MCAT a couple months before, so it helped me a little bit in the biology and chemistry section. Like I didn't have to spend as much time reviewing. I know you may need to put in a little bit more time if that wasn't the case. And when did I take the test? So I took it when I was in grad school. So like after my first year of my master's, like I took it into February. But a good time that I think a lot of people did take it is after second year, because I think you would have taken a lot of classes that would have helped you out by then in aiding you in your studying.